All right. Okay, brilliant. So thank you very much. I'm just going to say a little bit about who I am. So I'm Dr. Barbara Chinyani from the Royal Holloway University of London. So course lead for health studies, which is a very new department within Royal Holloway. So my presentation is going to be talking about strength-based approaches to teaching and learning. And this is mainly coming from my background within education, which has been predominantly working with learners from widening participation or from minority backgrounds. So this is where I'm coming from and am taking this perspective from. Besides that, I'm also an international social worker and social development worker, having worked within the sector here in the UK and also abroad. So a little bit of my focus on teaching or my teaching practice and strategies are coming very much from a social work perspective and a social development perspective. So very much from empowerment approaches to everything I do. So just to start us off, I just want us to look at this quote from the late Nelson Mandela that says, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And I have not heard much stronger, more powerful words than that. Because as we can see from just this room alone and those who are going to be watching this after, education has played a very big part in how the world is developing, what we understand about being, how we treat each other, how we function in the space that we exist in. So to be an academic or to be a teacher, a lecturer, someone who facilitates education, I think is more than just a profession, it's a vocation. You've got to love and understand exactly how powerful what you are working with is. And so I just wanted to remind us, as those people who've been entrusted with the education of future generations, to recognize how powerful what we have is and how important it is to empower ourselves at every opportunity so that we can have the best outcomes for our learners and overall to have that work satisfaction. So having said that, if we take a step back and look at how education has been delivered, you will find that there's been a traditional approach to education that has focused largely on deficits or what learners and students are not good at, or the risk factors and behavior problems. So very much a structure that looks at problems rather than strengths and assets. However, with this strength-based approach, what it calls you to do or what it challenges you to do is to look for that individual learner's strengths and not their weakness as a starting point. Not to say that their weaknesses are not going to be an issue, but it's focusing on the strengths first as a starting point. Now, within this strength-based approach, what we do need to recognize is our learners' capacities and capabilities. When we look at what they're able to do first, the learners begin to realize that they've got something to offer. So they begin to recognize the strength that they bring to the table and to the environment that they're learning in. They recognize that even though I am coming to learn something, I have got something to give. I've got something that I can share and others can learn from. So having a learner coming in with that perspective and attitude normally reduces the transition issues, all those ideas of, do I really fit in? Am I an imposter in this class? Should I really be here? It takes away a lot of that uncertainty that we are finding a lot of our learners experiencing right now. And dare I say, especially now that we've had about 2.5 years of COVID disruptions, which took away all those social interactions that a lot of our learners would have had they been having face-to-face instruction. So bearing that in mind and having learners, students who come to our classrooms or lecture rooms, we need to understand that there has been that disconnect from those social interactions, which could have given them more confidence. So starting off from a position of what they're capable of, what they're good at, or what their strengths are, is usually a way to break them into transitioning smoothly into education. So having said that, when learners recognize that their strengths or their skills and what they're bringing to the table is adding, it then allows them to see how they can transition from an academic study into real life, meaning employability and looking at future careers and future prospects. So it is important right from the get-go to set that tone within in our classrooms or the learning environments that we foster, so that they understand that you bring something to the table already. Anything you're going to get from this place is to enhance and not to take away. So that's the first thing about strength-based approaches that I really wanted us to have a look at. When we think of the idea of strength, again, if we go back to the deficit model or the traditional model of looking at capabilities, you'd probably think this is a learner being very good at math or speaking English very well and all these other traditional ways and skills that we have measured over the years. However, what we're recognizing is that strength is linked to more than just those competencies. Strength is coming also from previous experiences. It's coming from those transferable skills, the cultural capital that a lot of our students are bringing to the rooms. Now, if I just pause there for a second to just dig a little deeper into what these strengths are. Previously, pre-COVID, we had social interactions. Everyone was used to mingling and, having chats, playfulness and all that. And then we had 2 years of our life that were disrupted, and a lot of our learners did not know how to transition back into the face-to-face and the interactions that they were having. What we do find is that within either the homes or their communities, the social relations or the interactions that they had would have had an impact on their ability to be strong or resilient in dealing with things. So when we're looking at strength-based approaches, again in education, we need to see those social relations and collective identities as a strength that could build upon their learning and how they interact with the wider community. Now, when we're looking at these social relations, this can be something as simple as the way they work together within a team setting in a group task that you've given them, how they interact, who takes charge, who's listening to who's coming up with ideas. So all these social relations that they would have learned either at home or within their wider community become a strength that they can bring into the educational environment and thereby enforce and reinforce those key communication skills that they need for the future of work much later on. So it is important that we recognize those as academics and facilitators of education, that our students are bringing in lived experiences, social relations, identities and practices that we can use, adapt our teaching styles, adapt our strategies, and incorporate those to facilitate a smoother learning process. Now, having said that, the OECD is beginning to shift its focus quite a bit from the traditional measures that they had about looking at the number of years you've been in initial education, training, the level of your qualifications, all that. It's moving away from those to a broader perspective that looks at the skills that learners have acquired. So if we're thinking of a strength-based approach, this fits perfectly with the agenda of the OECD in the sense that they recognize that there is something about those skills that people get even from interactions outside of the class that will give them the opportunities that they require for work and being able to navigate life as an adult. So when we're looking at the way we teach, the way we design our curriculum, the way we set up our activities, we need to be able to take into consideration how what we are putting out there in our curriculum design can increase or allow our learners to acquire skills, to use the skills that they already have, to maintain the ones they have, and try as best as possible to not lose the skills that they had when they were growing up. So if we align our practices, our strategies from curriculum design, activities, and the teaching to meet this skills need, then we will, I believe, have a happier cohort of learners who will embrace learning because they will be coming from a place of strength, and they will recognize that either their culture, their community experiences are adding to the body and the volume of knowledge. So having said that, the strength-based approach shifts the perspective. Many of you being academics would have probably had, as I have in the past, a class that has got a mixture of learners who you might think are problematic in the sense that, oh, they're noisy, or they're defiant, dramatic, hyperactive, oppositional. As academics, as facilitators of education, we've had a bit of challenge and frustration over these things. But what I challenge you to do today, if for anything as a takeaway, is let's change our perspective a bit. All that deficit, the traditional way of looking at things, which saw the problem, if we change that and look at the positive aspect, then we might interact with our learners a bit better and they might enjoy the experience. So instead of looking at a learner, student as defiant, I see my students as determined. So when they bring that defiance in, I celebrate that and say, this is brilliant. You are really determined to get this point across. Okay, let's work with this idea. So instead of fighting against it, we work with that. So you make that student recognize, or that learner to recognize that defiance, which could be seen in a negative way, has got a skill. There's a skill attached to that. Being bold is not easy, as we all know. Being determined in an environment where there may be people more qualified than you or with more experience can be very daunting. So right from the get-go in our learning environments, we need to applaud, recognize, and look at the strength in every behavior that comes across. So it's an easier way of challenging it. So you've got the dramatic students, as we know we've got, but no, they're not dramatic. They're expressive and they're passionate. And these are the sort of students, when you've got a new initiative that you want to trial out within your learning environment, the dramatic ones are the ones you bring over because they're expressive and passionate. They will tell you whether this works. They will tell you whether they can run with this or not. So it is important for us to see that positive side. We've got the fearful kind of students to others. They will not say a thing in class. You ask everyone to contribute, you never hear their voice. These are the more cautious ones, the careful ones. Again, we recognize and celebrate that. And when we approach them and encourage them to be more vocal, we pick on that. I see, Barbara, that you're very cautious about this. What exactly about this makes you uncomfortable? So you are able to see their quietness or their reservation as a strength and not as a weakness, not a lack of engagement, but rather a very judged cautiousness on how to engage. Now, we could talk about this table for hours, but one I wanted to pass on to you, which is one of my favorite negative perceptions is attention seeking. We have had quite a few of attention seekers in our classes. The ones that take over every discussion, they are the only ones that you hear. And I have to say, I was one of those students. But when we look at this from a strength-based perspective, what we see is that attention-seeking student is seeking connection. So every time they say something, they're trying to connect either with the concept you're talking about or discussing, or trying to connect with someone. So if we look at it from that perspective, we then let our guard down as facilitators of education. We embrace where they're coming from, look at it as a strength, and work with that. So this is something that I genuinely challenge each and every one of us to see the strength in all the weaknesses or the challenges that we face with our students. Now, quickly on how to implement this within the education sector that we have. So what I do in my classes, the first time I meet a cohort, I do very lengthy introductions. So I do an intersectional introduction where I say who I am. And when I say I am Barbara Chinyani, I just don't stop there as your lecturer or course lead, but I go further. I am Barbara Chinyani. I'm a migrant, came from Zimbabwe, born, raised there, educated there. So I say a little bit more about myself. A single mother to a son, this old, went into education at a very mature age, struggled with that a little bit, but here I am. So having those introductions that sort of break the ice and make you seem more accessible and more human are usually good in getting students to show their strengths and work with their strengths. So from that introduction, that is more like a storytelling of who you are and how you got to where you are, can let students open up about themselves and introduce themselves to one another and to you as their facilitator or lecturer or teacher. It allows them to say who they really are. So you're able to pick up on some of their strengths, weaknesses, but also their ambitions and the challenges that they are trying to address. So if we're keeping that strength-based approach in mind, as an educator, you would then be able to see what sort of support you can put in place for your learners. But also, one of the things that I've observed in a few of the institutions I've worked for is that when our students introduce themselves, you find they have this peer support. All of a sudden, they know what the other person is going through or the struggles that they have, and somehow they just group around each other and support each other. So it is important to make your learning environment that easily accessible and a safe and brave space for your students to be in so they can actually show their strengths and work with you. So incorporate as much of your learners' ambitions and strengths. So when you talk about something or when you teach about something, try and link it to specific ambitions, link it to what they're hoping to achieve, link it to their strengths. That way they will be able to co-produce with you and enjoy the learning journey. So that's a little bit about what I wanted to share. And I do hope that you will be able to challenge yourself a little and see the stronger side of everything.